We'll try to keep the spirit of the free discussion, which was here through all the days of the work of the forum, and we'll try to make the session as interactive as possible. That is why the speeches of our panelists will be intertwined with the questions or speeches from the audience. I'd like to highlight that today in this hall there are the members of the Valdai Club, guests, experts, and panelists invited by the members of Valdai Club to take part in this meeting. First time for 10 years, the meeting with the president in Valdai is being open. It's being broadcasted on the television, and the guests are invited to that. Before that, all such meetings were closed, which gave certain degree of discussion and certain depth of sincerity. And now I'd like to give the floor for a speech, a remark to former Minister of Labor and Education of France, former Prime Minister of France, Mr. Fillon. You are welcome.
Monsieur le Président, Mesdames et Messieurs, c'est un grand plaisir.
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, it is a great honor and pleasure for me to speak here today. The time and the weather have tried to prevent me from that, but with the help of the Emercom, we managed to come here to Valdai, and now we are here together discussing these matters. Every nation has its own tradition and its own history, but all of us had an opportunity to respond to the same question. We need to ensure the freedom of our countries and the unity of the nation. Without this balance, we have the risk, we face the risk, every of our countries, to submerge either in tyranny or in anarchy. And for centuries, each of our states tried to do its utmost to not to slip down to those extremes. But globalization changed the government art and made it more complex because we need to unite the diversity in one. The heterogeneity of our societies has become stronger, both economically, as our turnover has become more diversified and heterogeneous, but it has also become heterogeneous more personally. We have also united our mentalities and notions, and internet and social networks make their contribution to that. So the responsibility of the governments and decision makers is to allow people to strengthen this diversity. How do we make that? First, through democracy, and thanks to democracy, because democracy gives to our citizens an opportunity to be heard and to the governments the opportunity to act legally. There is another way, the law, which allows to everyone to avoid the law of the punch. And third way is actions by the government which protects society from violence and protects the interests of the individuals, also protecting freedom, because freedom allows us to meet and take some actions for the sake of our future. The state protects statehood without the diversity, with the diversity and without the different character of the nations. And of course, the state defends the interests of all the citizens and religions, which allows the religious and non-religious ways of living to coexist and but be divided. This unites the values, and these values are common for all the European continent, in the heart of which I always place Russia. From 1945, we've been celebrating the fact that we've won over Nazism, and I'll never forget the role of Russia in our victory. I will never believe that Russia is not free in choosing its future. It has managed to overcome the stage where there were gas cameras and gulag, and you really are the inheritance of this awful past. But our past cannot prevent us from building new European civilization, which would be prosperous and free. There are a lot of arguments and support to that in Russia and in France, but many say that Russia is a special world. That's not quite true. We have common past. We have economic, geopolitical, and cultural continuity. We have common interest. In France, I represent the political union which is sure that Europe should be built from the Atlantic Ocean to Urals, and only by establishing common space through the Russian Federation can we achieve to the consolidation of our common values. I'd like also to say that I regret that the new partnership agreement between Russia and the European Union, which was to be signed even when I was the Prime Minister in 2009, is not yet signed. I believe that only by common efforts can we create the common space, because we have serious challenges, including in energy sphere. This necessity is long overdue, and this necessity is very human as well, because creating the common space will make it more understandable. And the human capital is very important, because people create common past and common future, and people are united by our common richness. So I am for the total cancellation of short-term visas between the citizens of our countries, because only open borders can make the interrelation of our countries better. When I was Prime Minister of France, and even now, I've been protecting these values. So how, ladies and gentlemen, can we also go around the Syrian matter? The Europeans have not the right to be divided when the response to Syrian crisis is concerned. We need to respond together, basing on our common values. We need to condemn violence from both parties in the Syrian conflict and the dire consequences of the use of the chemical weapons, which was confirmed by the UN. But also, we have to work on finding the resolution to the crisis, taking into account the international law and the respect to human rights. We have serious prospects to avoid military intervention basing on the international right, and our political perspectives or prospects for this conflict could be tragic if we do not interfere. So I welcome the Geneva conference, which was convened on the initiative of Russia, and the agreement between Lavrov and Kerry allowed us to postpone the military intervention. That is quite a positive development and the positive role of Russia in that. So I really hope that the UN Security Council will ratify the document and will sign or issue the constructive but fruitful resolution which will allow us to work together to solve the Syrian crisis.
I call upon the unity and trust among the members of the Security Council and all UN members, because this is a prerequisite which will allow us to change history. Otherwise, we will be unable to eradicate all chemical weapons stockpiles while complying with the rights and international law. And hopefully the UN will be the major player, and OPCW will help us to destroy chemical weapons. But that's not our single goal. We need to convince the parties to go to the peaceful way of resolving the crisis. And Russia is the country which can put its contribution into such resolution. Who else, if not Russia? Who can stop the bloodshed? Without Iran and Saudi Arabia, it would also be difficult to do this. So their contribution is also vital. That's why the conference is needed, which will unite all of us, the adversaries and proponents. We play a vital role in this major process, and hopefully France will also participate on the basis of an impartial approach while taking the decisions which have already been taken by it. Dear Vladimir Vladimirovich, I hope that this is the way which we will follow to bring peace to the Middle East. The European Union needs close cooperation with Russia, and I am convinced that Russia also cannot do without the strong influence and strong interconnection, despite certain problems, economic crisis, which impeded the process, and the Russian party also not always has the right understanding of our policy, but I'm convinced that the discussion between the European and Eurasian partners will go to a new level, and the Eurasian economic space, which is currently is more attracted by the West, by the East than by the West. I do not know how I can answer this question, but I am convinced that Europe and Russia will be able to search for the right answers. Thank you, Mr. Fillon. I would like to give the floor to the audience for questions, for comments. Participants of the Valdai Club, you are welcome. I would like to start with the member of the advisory committee, Mr. Dutkevich. The floor is yours. Vladimir Vladimirovich, it's been the 10th year that we are gathering together. It's a unique platform, a unique format. Thank you very much for the 10 years of your warm support to our activities. I have one question consisting of two parts. The article in New York Times, it's an excellent article wrote by you. You personally blocked the deepening of the Syrian crisis. That's a great achievement. Here the question arises, whose idea was that? Shoigu or Peskov? Whose idea was that? And when was the first time when you talked about this with President Obama? And the second part of the question, I believe this success, this achievement brought you to an inconvenient position because you became hostage. You and Russia became a hostage to such success of such arrangement. And if it proves not to be successful, you have many adversaries, many opponents who would not like the global policy to be played by four hands by the US and Russia. What if it will not be successful? Thank you very much for your kind words. Both for me and my colleagues, we liked that there are people in the world who are interested in Russia, in its diversity, its culture. And when 10 years ago I was told that such people would be interested in coming to Russia to participate in our discussions, to have dispute with us, to exchange opinions on the development of the country, on its place in the world. This idea was supported by me, by my colleagues, and I'm encouraged to see that over the last 10 years, this platform has become ever more relevant compared to the first steps which were made 10 years ago. The interest to our country is increasing. And I would like to thank you as well. I would like to extend my gratitude to all experts who are faithful to this interest, to the love to our country. As for the article, this idea was mine. It occurred to me by chance. I just noticed that President Obama shifted the discussion of the possible strike on Syria to Congress, to the Senate. And I followed the discussion for some time, and I just wanted to let the decision makers know my own position, to clarify it to them, because unfortunately mass media often presents some problems in a distorted way, or they are silent about some aspects. So the idea was mine. I called one of my assistants. I told him about my desire to issue an article in some of the leading newspapers. I I presented it to him. There is nothing in this article which I didn't mention before. And after my colleagues prepared it for me, I looked it through. I didn't like everything. I rewrote something. I added some ideas. I gave it to them. They finalized it. And then we were ready to issue it. And we agreed with our partners that it will be New York Times. We agreed with this distinguished newspaper that the article will be issued as it is. If they are not satisfied with this proposal, then we are going to address some other newspaper. To the credit of the leaders of the New York Times, they published it as it is, and they even allowed us to exceed the limitations on the number of words. One of my assistants told me later that President Obama was going to present his address to the nation, and maybe he could say that there would be no strike on Syria. We'd better wait. We waited. On the next day, when I was preparing to go for work, I saw the address of President Obama. I read it, understood that there were no principled changes. I put it aside, looked it through till the end, and only then I understood that the article is not complete. It was about the exceptionalism. The last abstract, the last paragraph about exceptionalism. And then I gave it to my assistants, and they sent it to the New York Times. That's all. And as for responsibility and accountability, you all are very smart people, very clever, and about Russia's responsibility. We have equal rights and we have equal duties with all our partners who are engaged into the discussions on Syria. And it's not the first time that I hear that we bear some unique responsibility. We all bear unique responsibility, the equal one. And if there are attempts to resolve the problem by peaceful means, it would be very dangerous. First, we need to investigate. My good friend, Francois, told me that after the report of the investigators, it was clear that the chemical weapons was used, but it was clear to us from the very beginning, and it was clear to our experts, but we do not know who did this. We are talking about the responsibility of Assad regime if they used it. But what if the opposition used it? Nobody discusses what are we going to do with the opposition in this case. There are some ideas that this is a provocation. No doubt, it's a very smart provocation, but a primitive one. Somebody used some munition of a Soviet times, which is labeled that it is Soviet, and used it. While it's not the first time of chemical weapons use, why the previous cases, incidents were not investigated then? I believe it should be thoroughly investigated, and if finally we will be able to get the answer to the question, who did this, who perpetrated this crime, which is undoubtedly a crime, then we will be able to transfer to the next step. Then, with our partners in the Security Council, we will need to identify the level of responsibility together. with solidarity. Senator McCain followed your suit and published his article in a newspaper, Pravda. From Soviet times, he remembered it to be a leading newspaper, but a lot has changed. No, I was not aware of this. Of course, I know the senator. We met in Munich at a very famous meeting. There is no anti-American in my article. I just presented our position. One just needs to read it carefully, what I'm talking about. We were promised that NATO will not expand beyond the eastern border. Why was it promised? Though it was not codified, they just what aggressive? Nothing aggressive. They just wouldn't like to accept what I'm talking about. I'm just being frank. I'm just being honest in order to identify the problems. This would enable us to resolve it. And as for the senator, he has his own view. I believe he has some lack of information about our country, and the fact that he wanted his article to be published in an edition, his intention was to publish it in the most respectful mass media. It means that he just has deficit of information. Pravda is certainly a very respected publication, but its coverage in Russia is very low, while he wanted his ideas to be presented to the bulk of the population. This just means that he doesn't have sufficient information. But he could have come to the Valdai club to participate in the discussions. As far as I know, our leading nationwide national channels invited him to participate in the frank and honest discussions. And here you see freedom of expression. He had an opportunity to present his ideas to the whole country, to discuss ideas with political experts, with State Duma members or Federal Council members. And it is regrettable that American colleagues did not receive this invitation. I do not see anything bad about this. I thought this proposal to be very interesting. The more direct talks we have, the easier it will be to resolve issues. Some other questions? Let us keep with the topics. Let us continue them. Jen Kendall, the floor is yours. Mic to the first row, please. The question from BBC.
And again about Syria. Russia has been applauded for its achievement in bringing about a deal which looks as though it could lead to the elimination of chemical weapons in Syria. All the more an achievement given that the Syrian government didn't admit it had them until very recently. But would you have been able to persuade President Assad to do this if there hadn't been a threat of American military strikes? In other words, did the US military strikes actually play rather a useful role, the threat of them?
Будет ли угроза удара играть роль в том, что Сирия согласится?
Whether first, I would like all of you, those present, to address the questions to all the panelists, to all those sitting in the podium, so that it will not be boring. And I would like to readdress your question to my colleagues present here. The threat of use of force and is not a cure-all for all international problems. You know what we are talking about. We forget the issue, the threat of use of force beyond the international law framework. We just recalled the fact that the Congress and the Senate are considering the use of force. This question should be discussed in the UN Security Council, not there. That's what the problem is about. That's first. Second, as regards whether we are able to convince Assad or not, I do not know. Now, it seems that Syria agrees with our proposal and it stands ready to act according to the plan which was elaborated by the international community within the United Nations, by Russia, by the US, represented by Kerry and Lavrov, who already presented draft plan. They have a special organization which cooperates with the UN, OPCW. Syria said that it is ready to join the International Chemical Weapons Convention. These are practical steps which has been done by the Syrian authorities, and whether we will be able to complete the process, there cannot be any 100% guarantee, but what we have seen recently, this is the basis for hope that potentially it could be done. I would like to remind you how these chemical weapons emerged in Syria. It emerged as an alternative to the nuclear weapons of Israel. We are all very well aware of this fact. And the question, what should be done with the proliferation or non-proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, it continues to be relevant. If it goes beyond control, as, for example, once powder went beyond control, we can hardly imagine the consequences. They will be dire. We need to seek nuclear-free status of great powers, especially the countries in the Middle East. We need to be cautious with a view to ensure safety of all participants to the process. The Israel itself has people who are against nuclear weapons. It's a famous case when a nuclear expert was brought to prison, but he continued to be convinced that he was right. There is nothing anti-national or anti-Israel in his position. He is a citizen of his country, but the technological superiority of Israel is that large that it does not require any nuclear weapons. Israel is far ahead of any country in the region, and nuclear weapons just makes it a target. It just creates some geopolitical problems for this country. In this regard, this nuclear expert who brought publicity to the nuclear issue in the country, his logic has some reasoning. Going back to your question, whether we will be able to succeed or not, I hope that we will succeed.
Mr. President, I suggest if we speak about security and defense, let us really give an opportunity for Mr. Ruhr to speak. Let's just speak from your chair, not from the rostrum. The mic is on.
Well, I wanted to speak about the young generation in this country.
Let's speak about Syria.
No, I'd like to have a chance, like my French colleague, to make. And first I would like to begin, because I've been here from the beginning, and also to compliment our Russian friends on the format of Valdai, the architects, because it would not be enough to call them organizers. What we have seen here I call the culture of inclusiveness and a lot of pluralism, and I can tell you, Mr. President, we were quite fascinated by the pluralistic voices from Russia, including very powerful statements by people that are in opposition to your politics. And I think this shows the strength of the country, that it was organized in this way. I've never looked at Russia with the narrow eyes, somewhat narrow eyes of a defense minister, you know this. I was first here in 1971. And Sergei Karaganov is a friend of mine since the late 70s. We don't look it, but it's a fact of life. And we have lived through SS-20 and Pershing. And what I would like to say is I came here as defense minister in 1995, and I went to Petersburg, St. Petersburg. And I said, I don't want to see any tanks, no artillery, no general. I want to see the mayor, Sobchak. And I got to know you also. You were part of his team. Why? He was a lighthouse for me as a young member of parliament in West Germany, still in the divided Germany. And I think what he was doing was much more important than tanks and artillery, and has proved this way. So it's a lifelong interest in a neighbor, and we all, I believe, on this continent are interested in a successful modern Russia. Now, young generation, what I've seen, and of course it was very interesting for me to listen to his daughter. It's a powerful voice for the young generation 2 days ago. So what I've seen here, what I've seen in Russia is you have it's really an asset to the country, your young generation. I mean, they're very intelligent. They want to have a good education. They want to be more internationally connected, and they want to have a bigger say in the politics of your country. They're knocking at the doors of the Kremlin. The young generation in my country, they also want to build their private lives. They are very much internationally connected. The doors to our Kremlins, which is the parliament and the government, are very open, but they don't knock at it. They leave it to politicians because they think things have been arranged very well, and we are very sad. I mean, some of the very best just want to have a successful private life, but don't engage in public life. So what my message really is, Russia can be proud of a young generation, even if there's political opponents that want to engage in public life, which is not the case in many of the West European countries. And I've said earlier in Russia also, we should give up this visa regime in the West, because that would enable hundreds of thousands of young Russians to come and see our life and our political system. But I must say it would also change Russia, because once they have studied in Rome or in London or in Washington, of course, there will be forces of change, the necessary change also in this country. But I think it would make the country also more competitive. Now, what has that to do with security? I think this is the best way to ensure security and to develop common points of view. And I'm very glad, I mean, that this culture of Valdai, I don't think there's any, I've been to many conferences, also to Munich, but the Munich is very narrow, security-wise. There's no conference like this in the world. And also when we listen for 4 hours to your people about ideas and politics, you know, we very often just talk from Monday to Thursday, our politics. That was very fascinating to see. The Russian speakers are much more interested in fundamental questions of society than we are, which is very much on the surface what we are debating. So I think this is something to start from, but the real message is, I think it would be a great project of your third term to integrate this young generation when they're knocking at the door of the Kremlin, because don't forget, we want more people to knock at the doors of political power in the West, and you can be proud of these people. That's my message.
Спасибо, господин Рюэ.
Thank you, Mr. Ruhr.
Пожалуйста, вопросы.
Any questions, please, Nikolai? Good afternoon. Everyone expects me to ask about the year 2017 and will you be going to the election, but maybe everyone who I asked, except you, refused to put forward his candidature for the president. Maybe you'll have to, I don't know. But I'll ask another question. I've read the article of Senator McCain. That's not quite a response to your article, I have to say, because it's quite a passionate one, which is not linked with Syria at all. And I do not think it is quite politically correct, but that's my personal opinion. But the main idea in this article, by the way, he says that in the article, the criticism of Putin is, he says in the article that criticism of Putin in Russia is not possible, but I'm a living example of the opposite. I often criticized you, and I'm here, alive and safe. And even I do not agree with some things you said today, and still I'm alive and safe. But Senator McCain says that the current power and the government in Russia is not adequate in representing Russian society, that Russia deserves other government and other power. And my question is, I know that relations between society and the government is a historic problem in Russia. And before the last year elections, I remember you said that maybe we should change the constitution, we should change the relations of government and society, we need to raise the responsibility to develop the local authorities' power. And there was an idea to involve the young people into the government. And I hear sometimes that there are calls to demolish this power and create new ones. So how do you assess the relations of society and power and government in Russia? Do you believe that we should do something about that? Maybe McCain is right, maybe we should change something, but I do not think that he's very right in how he says that. So what are the relations of power and society in modern Russia? Thank you. Well, you remember how one of the prominent world politicians, former Prime Minister of Great Britain, was asked about democracy, and he said it's the worst way of ruling, but it's also the best. So I don't know a better form. So I believe that Russia deserves the best power in its quality in the world. Whether there is an ideal power in other countries, including the country you are representing and Mr. McCain is representing, that is a question. And that is quite a huge question. Because if we are speaking about democracy, twice in the history of the United States there were cases when the president was elected by a majority of the electors who were supported by a minority of the voting people, of the voters. And that is a drawback in the election procedures of the American democracy, in the very basis of it. So we all have problems. Maybe we have even more of them, of the problems here, but that is natural because Russia had very huge experience, monarchy, communism, then the 90s, and that all were a period of turbulence and of a hard restoration. But now Russia is on the way to democracy, and it is looking for its own ways to strengthen the democratic basics of the society. And this very fact that for a decade we've been coming here and discussing the things testifies to that, even if when we were discussing the things behind the closed doors, but still the results were brought to society. So which power should be in the country? I believe the Russian citizens should determine that, but not our distinguished colleagues from abroad. A year ago we had elections, and the majority, the overwhelming majority of the citizens voted for your humble servant, and that's what we will be basing on. That does not mean that we have to sleep on the laurels. Of course, I have to modernize myself, we have to modernize and develop the institutions, and we are doing so. Just look. We've returned to the elections, direct elections of the constituent entities of Russia, which is not quite a common practice in the world. It exists in the United States. In India, it is a different procedure. In many countries in the world, things are going differently. In Germany, in France, for example. But we have arrived to the direct election of the heads of regions of the Russian Federation. We liberalized the political parties' activities. You are specialists on Russia, and you know how many people took part in the regional elections of the new political parties, parliamentary regional elections. And many new parties there won the elections. And even here in the Valdai Club, the winners of these elections from the newly created parties were present. So this process of development and modernization is going. I don't think that it will ever come to an end, because this political structure of governance and democratical procedures should correspond, more or less at least, to the current demands of the society. And society is always develops, so the political system will be developing together with it. Thank you. Any more questions?
Charles Grant from the Centre for European Reform in London. I have a question for the President, but if other panelists wish to comment, I'd be grateful because it's about Ukraine. I know Mr. Prodi has a special interest in Ukraine. I'd like to know what kind of country you believe it is. Thank you.
Well, my friend for a long time, Mr. Romano, was the head of the European Commission for a long time. So let us ask Mr. Prodi to be first to answer, because I'd like to listen to him in that regard first.
Well, first of all, you remember that I was president of the European Commission, and I remember you that in our last common press conference, when I was asked about the relation between European Union and Russia, I told they must be like vodka and caviar. You know, I don't know which is which, but we are so strict, and things are not gone in this direction. You know, it's and there is something that we have to move it, to change, because really, well, maybe that my vision is influenced by the fact that I am by education an economist, but I see such a complementarity, such a necessity of working together that I think that we have to work in this direction. And clearly, it's not only a Russian problem. Europe is fairly divided, you know. In this case, you have countries that are much more inclined to deal with Russia, some other that are non-confident in that. We have also different vision in very simple problems like the visa. And I agree that the first step is to have free circulation of young people. The Erasmus project in Europe, that is a very simple, you know, circulation of students, is changing the mentality of a generation. We must do the same with Russia, you know. And clearly, the case of Ukraine, I think, is going in the same direction. There is now a double proposal, let's say, you know. One is the association agreement that will be signed probably in Vilnius end of November, and then there is the proposal of, let's say, Eurasian economy. First of all, I am not a technical expert of trade, but all the experts I consult and say, look, the two proposals are not incompatible. They are incompatible as taken as a picture, you know, as a static, but with some, if we put around the table with a goodwill, we can make very few changes and then make both compatible. And so, as I answered to Grant, reinforce the identity of Ukraine, but not as a dividing country, but as a bridge between Russia and Europe, because we need bridges. And Ukraine must and can be a bridge between us. This is, I think, my position that is very, very clear. And I am working in this direction because Ukraine is a great country. It's a great country, 45 million people, even if decreasing population is, you know, geopolitically very important, and must be the exercise of a cooperation between Russia and European Union. And Vladimir, on this point, clearly why I am so warm about that, you know, because I think that if we create two divided trade areas, will be for the future a damaging structure, you know, because clearly Europe is going in the direction of the trade, transatlantic trade and investment partnership with such a big area. Russia, with this, let's say, custom union, will have a dimension that is not comparable to the other one, you know. And so I think that, well, I don't want to judge Russia because I have not the right to do it, but the dimension of the country, the characteristic of the country, are so that the great change that you are working for modernization, technology, needs a strong link with Europe. You know, from this point of view, really, we are like vodka caviar, you know, because it's, I think that the complementarity is so high that you cannot do without us, and we cannot do without you. So we have to be very prudent, following your doctrine, you know, diversity but cooperation, very prudent to create a structure that then will diverge in the future. And this is the moment in which we must stay around the table as you did with Syria. You know, it's your proposal with Syria. It is a masterpiece because, first of all, has avoided the war, and even the American president was not so happy of this war. And second, it was giving the possibility to the Americans to save the big principles of being against the chemical, let's say, the chemical weapons, you know. So making a proposal that could be accepted by all. I think that this is a moment in the relation between Europe and Russia to use the same methodology that has been done with Syria. Because if we start to diverge, Russia will be more alone, Europe will be worse off, and you know, the future relation cannot help us in the direction that we both tried to explore in the past. I agree that to dance we need to be two, you know, one cannot dance alone, but I think that this is the moment in which we have to make these proposals.
Well, you see how good it is that I gave the floor to Mr. Prodi. Yes. Me and Romano, I'm speaking about what Romano has said. Take it into account. He's not an intellectual. He's a professor, he's a doctor, and he's a real European intellectual. But he is also a bureaucrat, a European bureaucrat. What has he said? The relations of Russia and Europe is like vodka and caviar. But vodka and caviar are both Russian products.
They are products manufactured by Russia, of Russian origin. In Europe, they are used to the principle, let's just eat your food and then we will eat ours.
Soda.
Okay. Grappa.
Grappa. Whiskey and soda is a bad drink. I do not understand it. We shouldn't mix such products not to spoil it. As for Ukraine, there are no doubts, is a sovereign state. It is due to the history, and that's the way it is. But we need to remember that Russian statehood today has Dniprovsk roots. We have common Dniprovsk cradle. Kiev Rus is the basis for the large state. We have common traditions, mentality, history, and culture. We have very close languages. In this regard, I would like to reiterate, we are one nation. Ukrainian people, culture, and language are, of course, unique. And this forms identity of Ukraine as a country. We respect it. I like it all. This is a part of our large Russian world, Russian-Ukraine world. But the history led that this country is now sovereign, and we respect this. By the way, Ukraine overcame a long way to achieve this state. It used to be part of one country, then another, and parts of Ukraine were not the privileged parts in such formations. Ukrainian people have had a very difficult destiny, and after when they were united into the common Rus, they started to develop at a rapid pace. Their industry, culture started to develop after the World War II. Soviet authorities allocated, if I'm not mistaken, 1.5 trillion rubles to restore the enterprises. 1/3 of this money went to Ukraine. Today, Ukraine is an independent state, and we respect this fact. Of course, the search for priorities, search for allies is a sovereign right of the Ukrainian people and legitimate Ukrainian authorities. This process, as we see it, the process of uniting, joining the European Association or signing the customs union agreement formed by Kazakhstan, Belarus, and Russia, we in Russia would like to sign a new basic agreement, and we discussed the issue of signing with the Europe, and we discussed it with Romano, the potential free trade zone. What's the difference? During the negotiation process, we in Russia, when we discussed WTO accession process, we achieved one customs protection level, and that it was hard because the competition with cheap and quality products in agriculture, in some other areas, this competition is a very daunting task for some of our industries, but the level of the customs protection is bigger than in Ukraine, maybe a twofold or almost twofold. Why are we stalled in the negotiation process with our European partners? It was not by vain that I said that they follow the principle, let us just eat your food and then ours. They are good guys, very intellectual ones. You can eat caviar, drink vodka or beer with them, or maybe some French or Italian wine, but they are tough negotiators. Why we cannot move forward in signing the new basic agreement and further agreement on free trade? Because our partners, as we believe, present too strict requirements to us, and they are trying to impose an agreement which we call WTO plus. WTO requirements related to opening markets and related to other parameters, standards ones, plus some other requirements. But first, we need to comply with the previous requirements, and we believe that if Ukraine joins the customs union, and then we coordinate our common efforts, joint efforts, and negotiate with the Europeans, in this case, we would stand a better chance to get better conditions, better terms related to the trade relations with Europe. And Europe remains to be our major trade partner, which accounts for 50% of our turnover. And in this regard, we believe this is in line with both Ukrainian and Russia interests. And we also are seeking to reduce the prices for energy, opening the markets in Russia. The Ukrainian Academy of Science supports our estimates. Ukraine received plus $9 billion, not minus, but additional $9 billion. And the issue of joining the European Union association, yes, this would liberalize the economy. Will Ukraine be able to cope with such liberalization? But it is up to our Ukrainian partners to decide. What is our problem about? If the level of customs protection will be still lower in Ukraine, then relatively high quality and cheap products will go to Ukraine, and they will undermine the Ukrainian products. Where? To our country, and this is what causes problems. We warn them. We say this is your choice. It is up to you to decide, but we will have to protect our market. We will have to implement some protection tools. We are warning you beforehand so that you wouldn't then say that we are contesting the sovereign rights of some state. One just needs to calculate what volume of products will go to our market and what protection measures we will have to impose. All the imports, agricultural imports to Ukraine, what share goes to the Russian market? Maybe 70 to 80% from the total volume. And where are they going to bring food, other products? Some enterprises in our countries cannot do without each other. And if we implement some limitations, these enterprises and whole industries will have difficult times. That's what we're talking about. We are warning them in an honest manner, while not trying to contest their sovereign right to make certain decisions. Thank you, Vladimir Vladimirovich. I would like to provide the floor to Mr. Symes for comments. It was my pleasure to listen to the discussion, to the remarks by the President. I am not quite comfortable. I feel as that honest old man who said that I'm an old man, I have nothing to lose, you're a genius. That's not the spirit which I would like to follow, but you should. It's very easy. Maybe you still like it. You would still like it. Our previous discussion, I didn't like it. It seemed that everything is bad. Yes, of course, we have certain problems between Russia and European Union. We have disagreements between Russia and the US. But with goodwill, with understanding, we managed to cope. And when I listened to the President, I had an idea that if we have some goodwill, we will be able to resolve everything. Friends, we just started to search for the solutions to one of the gravest crises after World War II. We haven't overcome it yet. And here it has not only technical aspects related to chemical weapons in Syria, but the fundamental difference of opinions. As the President said, Russia's position is non-use of force without sanction of the Security Council. And moreover, as the President said, there is no evidence that chemical weapons were used by the regime of Assad. And the American position and the position by the leading European powers is different. Why Mr. Obama had to accept the initiative put forward by President Putin, not because he refused the military strike on Syria, as he addressed the Congress. He was preparing his country for this potential strike, but unsuccessfully. First, the UK Parliament undermines the process, then the American public opinion, what happened in the US is unimaginable. I immigrated in 1973, and I see that the majority are political realists who do not like some foreign humanitarian interventions, who wouldn't like democracy to be distributed with the use of force. But their public opinion did not play much of a role, because and now for the first time, as a snowball, real public protest appeared, and it started with the fact that the administration was almost sure to achieve the Senate, and it wanted, after the approval from the Senate, to put pressure to the other chamber. And I was watching TV, all those meetings between congressmen and including McCain, senator, and people criticized them. They asked them, what were you doing? And the more President Obama explained to them why the strike on Syria was needed, the greater was the public opposition. And after that, you, Mr. President, put forward an initiative. This initiative enabled Mr. Obama, while saving his face, to accept inadmissible. There can be no strike, but the main motives to remove Assad, to make him go, to demonstrate that the US and President Obama personally, if they draw some red line, in this case chemical weapons use, then the US cannot tolerate this person to stay at power. And as Washington said, evil was to be punished. This problem is much broader than Syria. When we're talking about national identity of Russia, I recall being in Russia with President Nixon in 1991, and when he spoke in the Institute of International Affairs, and he surprised everybody, saying that Russia is part of Western civilization, and Russia needs to understand that there are certain common mechanisms of democracy and joint market. But he said Russia should not be in the follow the policy of the US and shouldn't try to uphold the Western values, because it is not only natural to Russia, it, as he said, will have a boomerang effect. It will be counterproductive. In long term, Russian society will not support this, and there will be some inacceptance to the West and to the US, and the US and the West will have to pay a price for this. And now my last comment. Winston Churchill, which was mentioned by President Putin, said a very wise idea about the US. He said the US and the Americans finally come to a right decision after they try everything else. I hope that we are now coming to the end of trying everything else, and I hope that this will open real opportunities for US-Russian relations. I welcome the strict position of President Putin. I believe that in relation to the great powers, there should be strict positions. This is the way to understanding. We need to come to realize what needs to be done. But my question to the President is the following. In your Munich speech and in your article in New York Times, you demonstrated that what red lines Russia itself draws. But if you had a tete-a-tete meeting with President Obama, if you were if you had a one-to-one meeting with President Obama, what, in addition to what was said by you in the New York Times article, if the US saw this window of opportunity and tried to use it, how would you see the opportunities for Russian cooperation? What could you suggest in terms of changing in position of Russia on maybe some areas? First, I do not think that this initiative on putting Syrian chemical weapons under control contributed to the fact that President Obama saved his face. It was his decision, his own decision, which was based on the real analysis of the situation, and I'm very glad that our positions converged on this matter. That's first. Second, what would I say? There is no secret here. I told to President Obama last in St. Petersburg on the sidelines of G20 and previously in Los Cabos, one and the same question arises. The majority of experts, and you as one of the most renowned expert on Russia and foreign policy, I can ask you why. I always ask, why are you trying to achieve this? Evil should be punished. And what is evil? That President Assad's family is at power for 47 years. Is it evil or not? In the understanding of the American establishment, maybe they do not have democracy. The Saudi Arabia, they say, also do not have democracy, but no one is going to strike it, to bomb it. What is it about? We, together with the Americans, the Europeans, need to establish a confidential dialogue, to listen to each other and to hear to each other's arguments. They say evil should be punished, they should have democracy. Just look at Egypt. For 40 years, they've had an emergency there. Muslim Brotherhood were in the clandestine. There were elections, they came to power, and now everything returns back. Again, they are in the clandestine, again, emergency. Is it bad or good?
You know, we should understand that there are countries, there are regions in the world which cannot live on the very same models, whether it be American models or European models. They have a different society. They have different traditions. In Egypt, it went round the circle and went back to the initial stage now. We may be guided by noble motives of our actions, and those who were performing those military actions in Libya were guided by noble models. But what is the result? They were fighting for democracy, so where is it? The country is now split into several territories. That is the fact. Headed by different tribes, and everyone wars against everyone. Where's the democracy? The American ambassador was killed. That's the result of such a policy. That's the result. I'm not speaking that to criticize anyone or to attack anyone, no. It's just I call on of our partners to listen to each other, to listen to the arguments of each other. We don't have any exceptional interest in Syria, for example. We don't. We don't follow any particular interest to preserve the acting government. That's what I've written in my article. I've written my thoughts there. We are fighting for the preservance of the principles of the international right. The founding fathers on the American initiative, when they formed the rules and procedures of the work of the UN and the Security Council, on the American initiative, I'd like to highlight, the founding fathers wrote down that war and peace issues shall be decided only unanimously. That has the deepest sense in it, no matter how difficult it is. if one of the countries tries to unilaterally solve this matter, feeling itself invulnerable and doing strikes there, and there, the international order and the very meaning of the UN and the Security Council would be drawn to nil. This would be a strike on the world order, not on Syria. That's what I'm talking about. And that's what the message I'd like to get across to you, to our audience, and to our partners in the United States. Thank you very much, Mr. Field. Yeah, I respect very much President Putin for two reasons. First, because he is a president of a great country, and second, because it is a country with 1,000 years of history and culture. That is why dialogue with him is necessary. But I have another reason to respect him. That is a person who fulfills his commitments and with whom dialogue is possible. It is not always an easy dialogue, but it is always possible. And for the 5 years when I was in government, I often saw during our international relations some formal talks, sometimes very boring when everyone was reading his speech prepared by his staff, but I have to say that with Vladimir Putin, discussions were always longer, more spontaneous and more lively, and of course thus more constructive, which allows me to see 2 points and speak about 2 points. Of course, first, we do not want to export our political systems to anywhere. I really believe that every nation and every people has the right, depending on their culture and life, to choose how they want to live. But we also cannot, we, Russia or Europe, also cannot stay idle to mass killing, to the massacres which continue for the 2 years. And that's not the same thing to speak about the interference of one state into the affairs of another state and imposure of its own model. But these are the attempts to stop the mass killing. That's not the same thing. And from this point of view, if we interfered in the situation in Libya, which Vladimir Putin knows well, if we hadn't interfered, Benghazi would be demolished by the Libyan army. And Vladimir Putin has multiply called on Christianity, which he, as I, is deeply adherent to. And Christianity has some values which make us not be silent and not just stay aside when we see mass killing. Of course, we need to respect the international law, and that is why France now is against the strikes. Because I believe that strikes beyond the international law would aggravate the situation in that country. So I call on creating trustworthy relations in the Security Council, which could be built only if we take mutual steps towards each other. We can doubt about the report of the UN experts, but we'd better have a report than not have it. And now when we have it, we need to build between the members of the Security Council the trustworthy relations which would allow to avoid war and push on the Syrian parties to find political solution. And by the way, Vladimir Putin, who understood my responsibility formulation as if it was the words about responsibility were addressed only to him. No, it is not so. Because Russia, of course, bears certain responsibility on links with the regime of Bashar Assad, but we, the Europeans, have our own responsibility on the basis of our connections with the opposition. And our responsibility needs to push both of us to the same result, to make the parties stop fighting. That's not imposing any Western democracy on them. That's about stopping the mass killings of people, which is not acceptable to be going for the long time. Well, I'll just allow myself a couple of remarks in this connection. Of course, we can't stay idle to mass killing. But of course, let us be honest with each other. Yes, there is an internal conflict, but it was immediately fueled from outside. Arms were supported. Militants were sent from abroad to Syria immediately. And maybe even before that. That is a fact, which everyone knows. Where did al-Nusra come from to Syria, which linked with Al-Qaeda and a second organization? Quite a spooky stuff, actually, which are recognized as terrorist organizations by the US. Because everyone admits that the units of Al-Qaeda are in war in Syria. So when I say, okay, you are helping to the opposition, but now you are helping Al-Qaeda to come to power, what would you do next? Just take a newspaper and wave them off from the power? That does not happen so. You won't succeed in that. So what will you do next? The question. The answer, we don't know. That it was the direct discussion. So, but if you don't know, why would you preserve such a policy without knowing what it will end in? That is the question. And, you know, the principal difference of our approaches is if we try to interfere on the conflicting party's side by supporting this party, in the end, we will have no balance of powers within the country. Everyone will just collapse. No matter how difficult it is, we have to make both parties to find common points, to make them find the balance of interests, and then the situation in the country can be sustainable for some significant time, or maybe can be even sustainable for a very long time. But if we, with all our power, will support just one of the warring parties, we'll have no balance. In the US, they admit now that the military action in Iraq was a mistake. But we warned them then. No one would listen to us. I remember my discussions with the former president and the former prime minister of Great Britain as well. I would not just dwell on them in detail now, but we have warned them. We've said everything. No one would listen to us. What's the result? I believe I don't have to name the result in this audience. I mentioned about Libya. You said that Benghazi would be destroyed. Maybe, and maybe not. But is it better now when there is the full-fledged civil war in Libya there? In Iraq, dozens of people die every day. The number of people killed after the war ended in Iraq is now more than the number of people killed during the military actions in Iraq. So the result is absolutely opposite to the expectations. That's what we are speaking about. That's why we want to establish constructive dialogue with our partners in Europe and in the United States. By the way, in Libya, the quality of life and the level of life was higher before. What are tribes now fighting for? For the energy sources. I'm not saying that Gaddafi held the well-balanced regime. No, he thought of his own political theory. And it doesn't mean that we had to preserve the regime for hundreds of years, but to solve this matter in such a way as it has been solved was not successful, and it will not be. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Rui would like to oppose you in that.
I go along with what you said on Iraq. And we were as critical. The French were also. It was not a NATO. It was an American decision. But Libya was different. And I would like to remind you that in the first decade of this century, the United Nations created a new development and international law called responsibility to protect. What does this mean? Every state has a responsibility to protect his own population. And if he doesn't do this, then there is a right of the international community to intervene once there's a decision in the Security Council. And Russia abstained and made it possible to have this attack. And I would just like to say I'm very grateful to the French forces who saved the lives of thousands of people in Benghazi. This was not to create democracy, and it will take a long time, and it will always be different from us. But how many people can you kill in your own country by saying this doesn't concern the outside community? The international law says this is no longer possible. And coming to Syria, that's a different case. There is no international basis for intervention. But when you remember how it started, and we had a very interesting debate last night, it was in Daraa, in the south, that young people demonstrated like we do in the streets, like young Russians do in the streets, and they were shot. And later on, we all see the pictures of a president sending out his air force to kill people who are queuing to buy a piece of bread. Now, I can tell you a president who kills people with his air force, who want to buy a piece of bread, he has no future. He has no future. And this is nothing we just can look at. We have to come to an agreement what to do, and I'm very much grateful, for what has been established between you and the United States now. It's very precious, and I hope it will lead to results, and it will help both of you. It's a win-win situation for all of us. But we must also understand that in the world of today, you cannot just go at states who attack other states. That was the case in the 20th century. But what do you do with states that don't protect their own population? You don't have the right just to intervene, but on the basis of a UN decision, this makes sense, because everybody, every president of every country also has a responsibility to protect his own people. That's my position.
Полностью присоединяюсь, полностью.
And I fully join your position, taking into account that the use of force is possible only through the decision of the UN Security Council. I agree with that. Dmitry Symes, we promised you the degree of discussion, okay? It emerged. Dmitry. Well, responsibility to protect is a good principle. And I know that in the West we are following it always. For example, in Germany, as I heard, Germany has broken diplomatic relations with Egypt when they killed 1,000 of peaceful demonstrants who were supporting their legally elected president. That's a joke, of course. Germany did not break the diplomatic relations. The US did not impose any sanctions then. They didn't even stop the arms sending to that country. And I have to speak frankly, I have no problems with that. I'm a political realist. In such the way the world is working, if the US would just abandon Egypt, that would be a political mistake, I believe. But we have to be frank. When I read about 1862, when France and England, mainly France, were lecturing Alexander the Second, the Tsar, about the Russian problems in Poland, and at the same time, England and France were colonizing Africa in the most violent methods. Yes, let us kick the Europeans. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. But we have such double standards. And I'd like to be frank, as a friend and good friend of President Putin, Henry Kissinger, says, the double standard in the international relations, when you draw the line between friends and opponents, that double standard is normal for international relations, but you have to know where to stop. Well, unfortunately, Henry is not here now, and he would introduce interesting notes in the discussion. That's a frank opinion, because for many times I was convinced that in the world there are people who, despite their patriotic feelings and national interests, have learned to speak what they think, say what they think. Henry is one of them. And the president of Israel, I believe, is one of them. Of course, he has some limitations as an acting president, but in personal discussions, he's very free and frank. And I even am sometimes surprised at how free he is in the discussions. And Kissinger, he's not a civil servant now, and he has an opportunity to be frank. Mr. President, we have 10 or 15 minutes for the questions now. Okay, yes, Vladimir.
Владимир Ильич, я тоже со своей стороны.
Mr. President, On my side, I've been for the decade in the club, and I really have to say that that's a wonderful platform. No censorship, frank discussion, very severe questions discussed. And I believe this 10th Valdai is the most interesting because when each day we were working 10 hours very productively. Let me speak about the domestic policy for some time because we now were dwelling on the international policy for a very long time, on the foreign policy. You know, I believe that the domestic Russian policy is causing great interest now. And this is connected with the fact that we are seeing the waking up of the society for the several last years. Somewhere it happens in a very acute way, somewhere not, but it's very active. And we can't but agree with your words that without a dialogue and without taking account of all the opinions through violence and through force, you can't build a strong country. That is equal for Libya, Syria, and Russia. And now a provoking question, if I may, what is concerning me very well personally and what is concerning people present here and a lot of people in the country. First question. The events of the 6th of May last year, when there was a demonstration in Moscow, which unfortunately for all of us ended in certain clashes between a part of the manifestants and the law enforcement bodies. Now there is the so-called Bolotnaya affair, Bolotnaya case, and some people are for a year and a half already are under arrest or under investigation and can't even can't even say goodbye to their died relatives who have died. I know that one convicted person, a grandmother died yesterday, and he even can't say goodbye to her, can't bury her. So the matter of this criminal affair against the manifestants of that time. I've learned the matter in detail. I've studied the matter in detail and looked at our penal code. It says that massacre is when there is the explosives, threat to health, threat to property, and mass violence. But there was none of these things on the 6th of May. There was single clashes. But the article of the penal code is very severe, and I'm afraid if it results in severe sentences, this topic would raise tensions in the society. Maybe we should think, I understand that we have independent courts, but still, maybe we should think about an amnesty to the participants of those events to lift this great concern of many people of our country.
And our second concern, for 2 days we've been discussing the elections on September the 8th. Representatives of 2 parties were present, Sabanin and Yekaterinburg. In many regions witnessed a very competitive election campaigns, but around dozens of regions unfortunately witnessed vote rigging. This is confirmed by experts, but by local citizens, and this leads to the awakening of the society. The society would like to participate in governing the state. It would like to participate in the elections to receive legitimate power. Some people in the regions are used to rig votes, and this leads to disillusionments, to the erosion of trust, confidence to the country. So maybe we should consider some additional measures, given that in 1 year we are going to see other election campaigns, some measures which would guarantee in the country a fair and just election campaign which would alleviate and lift the concern and would bring to the political life a whole generation of creative, patriotic politicians. Thank you. As regards to the so-called Bolotnaya case, were there signs of mass protests or not? I wouldn't like to provide any legal definitions. I do not contend contest your qualification as a lawyer, but it is up to the court bodies to decide. I just want to make the following comment. We should in no way forget lessons provided by modern history in neighboring countries. Just recall the protests in London recently. Thanks to the surveillance cameras, the police service, they were trying to find, they were finding the participants. They managed to do this and punished all of them. And I believe they did it right. There should be no illusions that such behavior is possible. If there were signs of mass protests or not, I do not know. It is up to the law enforcement agencies and court bodies to decide. I wouldn't like to interfere into this discussion, but I can say one thing for sure, and I would like once again publicly share my position on this situation and similar ones. If people behave like this and they express their opinion in a way which violates rights of other people, violates the law, then there should be certain response by the authorities. We shouldn't call upon law enforcement agents to fight or beat them by the protests. You know what this can lead to, and we need to prevent such signs in accordance with the applicable law. It should be known to everybody, and we also shouldn't blackmail authorities saying that it will be labeled as undemocratic. Authority is authority, and it should respond in an appropriate way. In this case, to consider the right of amnesty, I do not rule this out, but we need to have a serious attitude to this incident. We just need to let all the procedures to come at their logical close. And as for the elections, which were unfair in some regions, well, I do not know, maybe there were some irregularities somewhere. You yourself recalled elections in Yekaterinburg. Here, the newly elected mayor was present and he made a speech. He's a very interesting person, representative of non-systemic opposition, and he won the victory in Moscow in our major megapolises. Elections were fair, competitive. It was expected that the mayor will won in the first round, and even with the great results, but his opponent also had very good support. And I cannot say that elections in Moscow were unfair. I think you and your colleagues were present in the elections. I cannot even imagine what else can be done to make them more transparent. If you have some proposals, some considerations, let us discuss them, let us implement them in our legislation. Well, there maybe I cannot rule out some irregularities in the regions. You and representatives of law enforcement agencies, I encourage you to identify such irregularities and take measures. And by way of concluding, I would like to express my hope that your proposals will be right. I think about this every day. I would like smart patriots, young patriots, to be engaged in the politics, who have clear vision and understanding what should be done for their country. That's my sincere desire, and I'm going to do my utmost to contribute to this process with the help of informal organizations. You have been in politics for a long time. You used to be a politician, And you know that the protests can be used as a basis for some electoral results, but this does not mean that this will be followed by positive development of the regions by municipalities. We need highly qualified, trained people, efficient managers with clear vision as for the ways of the developing the country. Ksusha, well, you're welcome. Vladimir Vladimirovich, while being at power, you witnessed the emergence of the first post-Soviet generation in Russia. And this generation is ready to invest its time in the politics. Mostly they are young people living in big cities with good education. They are ready to work as volunteers, as observers at the elections, and to participate in manifestations. What do you think? What is the moral and ethical need of these needs of such generations? Do you have any political competitors among them? And what do you think? What memories will this generation have of you, and what memories will you have of this generation? At early 90s, at early 2000s, the bulk of our citizens were in dire straits due to the collapse of the great power, due to the destruction of some ethical values, which were the basis for the Soviet society. And this was followed by the economic collapse, social disasters, almost civil war in the Caucasus appeared. The population was frightened. All people had the desire to overcome this period as soon as possible, wanted the situation to stabilize and to pass to the gradual development. In general, these goals have been achieved partially, mostly, and now we have the chance to look at other aspects, to analyze what has been done well or bad, not under the pressure of those problems which we faced in early 90s and 2000s, but in a quiet condition. And I'm encouraged to see that young population does this. Our young people do not have much experience. Who were been in China? They also were young people, and we would not like to use them as an example. We need to follow the suit of modern people who have a clear understanding of the country they are living in, and who have a clear vision of further development. That's essential. I mentioned it when answering the question asked by Volodya Ryzhkov. We need this thinking society, not just destroyers. We've had a lot of them. We had one war after another, one revolution after another. We need creators. And I would like those people who are actively engaged in the politics, which is a very good sign, a very good process, which is a sign of some relative well-being. I would like them to demonstrate more creative features. I would like to see more professionals among them, and I believe that it will be the way. My colleague from Germany said that unfortunately in Germany the young population is not that interested to politics. I do not quite agree with you, because back then the Green Party emerged, which was formed by the young population, and just recently, partially, in part, I support environmental movements. I believe they are an essential component of our work. Now we have the piracy party, which now is a bit on the back burner in the electoral sense. It was also formed by young population, and I would like their activities to be of a positive nature. Of course, it should be done in the context of competition, and I am looking forward, I hope, to see creative leaders. Our country needs them. You're welcome.
Господин президент, в первую очередь.
Mr. President, first I would like to thank you for your very informative remarks. Going back to the integration issue, the other side of this issue is related to the assessments on the part of the countries of the European Union in terms of the signing the accession of Ukraine to this association. Valdai Club participants are well aware of the fact that last year and this year there is some kind of skepticism in the European Union in relation to signing this agreement. But it should also be noted that recently, in response to the Russian policy, not only Ukraine but Moldova and especially Armenia, they witness the decrease of such skepticism. It becomes much lower. My question is, this counter effect, is it to surprise of you? And if in November an agreement will be signed, what conclusions will be made by Russia? Thank you. I believe I've already answered this question. Could you get the mic, please? First, it relates to the economy, not to the politics, not to the sovereignty issues. We do not have any desire to revive the Soviet Empire. It's clear it is not lucrative for us any longer. We do not need it any longer. But talking about pragmatic aspects, we should keep in mind, and as I already said, it relates not only to Ukraine but Moldova, which you mentioned. Where does it sell? To whom does it sell its wine? Not to France. Not a single bottle will be allowed on the French market. Neither in Italy. I am sure 100% just try to import their wine in this country. The farmers are going to protest, to boycott. Nothing will be sold on the European market, which is at the same time the priority in the external trade of such countries. Everything goes to our market, almost 100%. If we take the volume of the import, say Moldova, where does it go? To us, to Belarus, to Kazakhstan? If they sign an agreement, if Moldova, the leaders of Moldova will sign this agreement, then cheap and high quality Italian and French wine will be going to Moldova markets, and where they will get the Moldova wines, and new regulations will be implemented which are not compatible with ours. New rules will be introduced. There are certain aspects which are automatically implemented not in Moldova but by the European Commission, and they will be automatically spread to Moldova, and then their goods will go to our markets. That's first. And second, we think that under the disguise of Moldova wine, they are going to import wine produced by some third countries to our market. It is not related to the attempts to put pressure to the sovereign right to make decisions. We are just calculating everything. And if our colleagues think our arguments not to be sustainable, we would ask them not to be hurt by some protectionism measures. There will be nothing unusual about this, nothing egoistic, nothing selfish. We need to think about our own interests in economy. I would like to give the floor to the representative of our Muslim diaspora to ask the question. Distinguished Vladimir Vladimirovich, let me first thank you for this great platform. We, in our small confessional group, have been discussing various issues. We would like to thank you for the course to uphold the moral values of the humanity, which is of vital importance today. And we would like to thank you and the proponents of your initiative related to the Syrian settlement. It is very important. I would like to remind the audience, if you allow me, that the capital of Syria is not some regular city. As billions of Muslims and some Christians believe, this is the phenomenon of the Christ, and they say that the Christ will come for the second time in exactly this city. The Pope, Pavel II, visited the White Minaret, which is considered to be the place where our Savior will come. It's just wonderful. Our confessions understand, and some leaders supported this initiative to bring peace to this region. I would also thank you for your support to traditional confessions in the country, and Irion said that over the last years we lost over 50 imams and muftis who are killed for their beliefs and who protect peace and stability in Russia, not only the Muslim ones. One rabbi in Dagestan was also attacked, and our Orthodox Christian brothers were also attacked. And I hope that religious relations in our country will continue to develop in this right direction. I believe this is not a question, this is just some brief comment. And the last two questions. We have a lot of them, many familiar faces. Mr. Kudrin is somewhere. Why are you hiding? Do you have a question? Any questions? No, I just meant that there are a lot of familiar faces. I have questions to him, and he doesn't have any questions to me. Vladimir Vladimirovich, we have a lot of political differences, but we have one common desire. We need great Russia. Russia can be great only if it is united. And by united, I am using this word in a broad sense, not as a name of a party, of a political party. And Vadim mentioned Bolotnaya case as an element of difference. I believe you have secured yourself a place in the history, and future generations will judge everything what has been done. Some minority now, which on many occasions came to the Kremlin gates without any hope to be heard, and once when it came, it had a fight with the guards. Was there a crime, a criminal penal crime or not? You are the winner of the presidential elections, and there is a draft of amnesty provided to the State Duma, and it is up to you to decide. There are other lines of division which you mentioned in your remarks today. For example, the regional one. You mentioned the issue of separatism. You referenced Siberian separatism. I represent Siberia in the state. What part? Novosibirsk. I represent Novosibirsk, and I hope to participate in the mayoral elections in Novosibirsk. And I would like to. Opposition is not only about talks, but also about actions. So my question: in your election campaign promised to raise salary of teachers. The result is a demonstration by the state of the Russian governance. Our region implemented your decree. We increased the salary of teachers, which is now 22,000 rubles, but now over half of our regional budget goes to educational. It's good. I am a leftist. I like it. But in a village, if the teacher receives 22,000 rubles, while others receive much less, this is disliked by others. And I am asked by others when we are going to increase their salaries. It is an example that it is difficult for Moscow to rule the regions. It needs to delegate the power. And your predecessor, Medvedev, promised to redistribute the incomes, to allocate some budget to the regions. What is your attitude to this promise? I am, as a future mayor, can say you that after this money is received by regions, you will see Russia can be great. As for the teachers' salary, I was talking that the level of their wages will be average for the region. If, for example, the region you represent, the average salary is 22,000 rubles, then the teacher should receive this amount of money. This doesn't mean that he's an oligarch. Just imagine an oligarch, a teacher. They live modestly, but they need to receive maybe a little bit more than some categories of workers you mentioned. For the sake of whom? For the sake of those people who receive this not big amount of money, so that their children have equal chances with other children from more well-off families. The future of our country will depend on the quality of education. I think you will agree with me. But if we do not pay decent salary to the teachers, we will not achieve this goal. And the fact that the bulk of your budget goes to those social needs, of course, we would like more money to remain in the budget. But you're right here. But all these investments, to a large extent, have a large share of inefficient expenses. I am just using cautious terms, not mentioning corruption or anything, but the efficiency is often very doubtful. But if we give money directly to such category as teachers, that's the most efficient investment into the future of country. As for the trillion, I would like 1 trillion or 2 to give to the regional budgets, and we are now considering issues related to reforming financial relations with municipalities and regions. We need to balance the volume of rights and responsibilities and to provide to them their own sources, maybe 1 trillion, 1.5, 2. We need to take into account realities. And due to global issues in Russian economy, we have some limitations and restraints, but we will seek so that municipalities, especially such large ones as Novosibirsk, have their own sources of funding to fund the tasks they are resolving. And after elections, you will be able to demonstrate your best qualities. I hope that the elections will be transparent, fair, and competitive. The last question. You can choose. Fighters? Fighters for what? Just fighters. Give them the floor. Okay. I'm sorry for being so impudent. I raised my hand for a long time, but I didn't have a choice. I was asked by the fighters from the whole world. Now Budapest is holding a competition on behalf of the International Federation of Fighting. I would like to thank you on behalf of our federation. Thank you very much for your input in developing our sports, freestyle fighting, to remain in the Olympic family. We all understand that it is your achievement. All those children who now doing these sports, they have huge enthusiasm. It is thanks to you, our fighters, Olympic champions. They were children who went to gyms with a good spirit, with the aspiration to achieve Olympic medals. This was the decision by the International Olympic Committee, which was well balanced. It is true that we have friends there. We try to cooperate with them, to work closely with the members of IOC. And indeed, we welcome such decisions. I can hardly imagine the Olympic program without those sports which were the basis of ancient fighting, running, track and field exercises. And in order to conclude, I would like to make a proposal. I would like to address the audience. Could you please ask the questions not to me, but to each of my colleagues who are present here on the stage? I do not like the word panel, but everybody is using it nowadays. Our panelists. To each of my colleagues, could you ask one question to each of them? And after that, the last one for me. Let us start with the Federal Republic of Germany is undergoing a very responsible moment. Elections are conducted in the country. Maybe some questions in this regard: how the government will be formed, who will be in the coalition. For example, how in the future Germany will be developing its relations with Russia. It's our second largest partner after China in terms of turnover now. So maybe somebody is interested in these questions.
I think you see the same chancellor as a partner in the future, Russian-speaking Angela Merkel, with about 40%.
Третий раз уже.
For the third time already.
I think she will not change. She will always be afraid of dogs. But she'll get 40% and more. But the question is, which coalition partner? And it's an open question if the Liberals, with the foreign minister, whom you know, will get into parliament. So this is why Mr. Genscher, I think, who was originally here, supposed to be here, didn't come, because it's really about the existential situation of the FDP, the Liberal Party in Germany. If they get a little more than 5%, there's a chance for a coalition like now, but I think more likely now will be a grand coalition led by Angela Merkel and the Social Democrats. But the Social Democrats last time had 23%, and it's not easy for them to be a junior partner again, because they are 150 years old, very prominent German party, and so I think they have to gain votes. If they go up on Sunday to 27, 28, they have enough confidence probably to win their party over, to be a junior partner in the election. But I think what regards Russia, I mean, there's there's a big consensus in Germany. We want to work closer and ever closer. And I saw you were fascinated by the Greens and the pirates. I'm afraid the Greens are in a crisis, and the pirates will have about 2%. Yeah.
Why?
Why? Because they have no program. I mean, your opposition is very concrete compared with the pirates in Germany. And so I think you'll see a lot of continuity in German politics. But as I hope, for instance, that Mr. Steinmeier would be foreign minister again, I think he's very much engaged in the German-Russian relations. And I'm also feeling that we should start a new impetus. And I'm very much encouraged by how you've treated the opposition and what you've told them here. And so I go home very optimistic. I'll cast my vote next Sunday, and I think you'll see a stable Germany on Monday. Also a Germany, I've said earlier in this week here, which needs the European Union more than any other state. Just because it is so big, we can look after our national interests best in this European context. And when there were problems coming up in the future, and there'll still be problems, I see a Germany that doesn't try to Germanize Europe, which is a difficult thing, would make Europe also a very boring place if they are just everybody's like us, would not be so interesting. We like the differences, so we like solidity, but also solidarity. And from my point of view, I think solidarity among North and South in the European Union may play a bigger role after these elections. That's my analysis. You can compare next Monday if this is working.
Спасибо. Вот что касается...
Thank you. As for the decreasing popularity of some parties, including new ones, due to lack of program, it's a clear lack of a clear program. It's very important for any country, including Russia. But partially, this is the answer to the questions which were addressed to me today from the audience. Let us ask Mr. Fillon, is he going to participate in the presidential elections?
Можно коротко ответить.
You can answer briefly, yes or no.
Vous n'avez pas répondu à cette question tout à l'heure vous concernant, je ne vois pas pourquoi moi je le répondrais.
Мне не задавали.
Вам задали.
Задали?
You were asked. I didn't hear. Nikolai Zlobin asked you this question.
J'ai dit que comme le président Poutine n'a pas répondu.
As my answer was not interpreted, I wouldn't like to answer this question because you didn't answer it when you were asked it. Let us
Я не исключаю.
see. I do not rule this out. Me too.
Мы работали вместе.
We have been working with Mr. Fillon when he was head of government and I was head of government. And I would like to say that I like him in a good sense of the word. He was a very reliable and constructive partner. He had very specific professional approach, and if he said no, it never sounded as something hurtful. He always provided arguments, but if he answered yes, then we always managed to lead our discussions to the logical end. I would like to thank you for our joint cooperation. Vladimir Vladimirovich, today you are asking questions, so we are reporting the news that Mr. Fillon is considering putting his candidacy. Are we looking forward to the stability of the Italian parliament?
Clearly, I listen that if you want to have a boring Europe, you Germanize it. If you have want to have a non-boring Europe, you Italianize it. This is for clear, you know, because we have every day some, but clearly,
Веселое, конечно,
Of
привлекательное.
course, we would like it not to be boring.
well, we can make an agreement. Eh? well,
Et la France dans tout ça, alors?
well, now the Italian politics is dominated by the problem whether Berlusconi or not can stay in the parliament. What I think is that in any case, this will not bring a government crisis. The government will go on, at least for what he declared yesterday and what the best, let's say, political experts understand. Clearly, when you have these personal problems, everything can happen. You know, it's out of control because personal decisions can break the situation immediately. But in this moment, there is some sort of decoupling between Berlusconi and the sort of the government. Clearly, the coalition is a difficult coalition because it's not a coalition like the German one that is done with parties that have, let's say, some big common shared value and, you know, quite a few differences. The two coalitions that now are forming the Italian government are clearly divided by many, many, many issues. But the Prime Minister is working quite well, wise, and is really making progress in the right direction. So even if you can't assure nothing for the long run, I think that you have short and medium term stability, as you can call it in Italian, you know. I have one small observation concerning Valdai. Vladimir, I liked it so much because this meeting are similar to a circus. You know, you have all the animals speaking, you know, and these are very free animals, and above all, there are not too many. This is the right dimension in which we may have many opinions, and also we could have one by one conversation. This is a good mix, and I ask not to change it, because if it becomes as big as many others, then you lose completely your idea of what is going on. And we had the idea what was going on today, and so it was quite a good experience. Last observation. We discussed about UN, about war, peace. I'm, of course, the first supporter that only with the Security Council you can act. But even in this case, you must understand to the consequence of what is happening, you know, because if you take, for example, the Libyan war, it was just done in order to avoid the slaughter in Benghazi, but then it enlarged the number of slaughters, you know, and so clearly we must go in the right direction, but we must know which is the right direction.
We in Russia also would like to wish every success to the government of Letta. He surprised me at G20 when he suddenly said that Italy cannot support plans of Syrian strike. It was to my surprise. I did not expect this. This was an open position within the Western community, despite the well-known NATO solidarity. Honestly, I was surprised.
He was my undersecretary, you know.
I can hardly agree that we are animals here. Do we eat plants or do we eat meat?
You know, as you told, as you told at the beginning, going on with your speech, you know, the diversity is also the diversity of food. Otherwise, we contradict your speech.
Спасибо большое, Роман. Спасибо. И еще один вопрос нашему американцу.
And one more question to our American friend and colleague. What the US is going to do with the budget deficit, with the public debt, which amounted to huge amounts, the largest level of debt in the post-war history of the US. What is further development of the situation? This affects directly the global economy. It's really a concern to everybody. First, we are going to count on further cooperation with our Chinese partners, and hopefully they will buy the increasing number of US government bonds over the next 2 weeks. Do not forget that Russia and Kudrin is sitting here. He bought a lot of such bonds. How much have you bought them? In what amount? How many of them? Vladimir Vladimirovich, the stabilization fund of Russia is on the central bank. We do not buy government bonds. We just have currency on central bank accounts. Gold and foreign currency reserves, they are allocated on the global market. Around 50% of them in the US. Around 40% when Alexei Leonidovich they had 50, now 40% are nominated in dollars. Not a Chinese trillion, but still a huge amount. This is a sign of trust on the part of Russia to our US partners. And here there is no irony to our confidence to American policy. And once again, your representatives of left parties attacked, criticized Mr. Kudrin that the bulk of reserves are nominated in dollars. But to the credit of our American partners, when we needed this money, we received all of them, despite any internal problems in the US economy, despite the problems related to mortgage companies. From the point of view of partner discipline, our American colleagues did what they promised. But what is your view? What will happen with the policy of the Federal Reserve and with the debt level? You will see a number of very complicated weeks or maybe even months when the House of Representatives is going to vote against the proposal by Obama if only Obama refuses from his healthcare reform. There will be a conflict between the House and the Senate and the administration as well. But I'm acting on the assumption that given my responsibility, our responsibility to you and to Mr. Kudrin, the US currency will stay, though the next months and weeks will be difficult ones. We, on our part, always believed that the policy of quantitative easing is to end at some time, but the first steps, the first words here led to destabilization on the global markets. Russia was affected to a lesser degree. Russian currency and outflows, they are not directly affected by the Federal Reserve's policy, but we hope that our American partners will be able to cope with these clear problems and the fundamental basis of the American economy will be stable. And the last question. Please, you. Two questions. It's good that only two, not three. And you're all right. Prokhanov and then you. Vladimir Vladimirovich. There is a powerful funding of military and industrial complex. I am aware of the program to develop high-speed transportation, in particular Moscow-Kazan. There are plans to intensify the northern sea route. Innovation centers are created. Before the elections, you published a number of fundamental articles. Is there a synthetic integral project, a large-scale one? Is there the so-called Russia projects, or are these only signs of these projects, a component of these projects? Russia is not a project. Russia is a destiny. It's life. Of course, we have development plans up to 2020, plan to develop military forces, to develop infrastructure. We agreed not to touch our reserves, which are quite huge. We just mentioned central bank reserves, but the reserves accumulated by the governments, the welfare fund and the reserve fund itself. In the first case, 79 billion, and in the second fund there is around 92 billion. And we agreed that after a certain amount is achieved, we will then take part of the money to invest in infrastructure. That was the basis for developing high-speed railways to Kazan. And at the first stage, we are conducting now development design works, and huge efforts are to be done in terms of developing infrastructure. We know that infrastructure is poorly developed in Far East and Siberia, and at the same time we with Alexei had disputes in this regard. We need a fundamental basis, and we need try to make this project profitable. There are not so many profitable projects in the world. Just try to make some highway which would be profitable in the Far East. Experts start to calculate the number of vehicles passing through this highway, the possibility to use it as a toll highway, but it can be done if only there is some other highway. And what then? Not to build anything there, and highways connecting western and eastern parts of Russia. Russia has just completed such projects. I believe that we need to invest money in such projects, even if at first it would not bring any quick profit. We need to take money from reserves, but carefully, so that we have some safety cushion left. The same relates to the military budget. It is a huge one, but it cannot be compared, for example, to the US defense budget. If we take all military budgets of all countries in the world, it will be less than spent by the US for military purposes. So our budget is a very modest one. But we have the so-called retirement age for our major systems, rocket ones, aviation equipment. We need to renew them. They become outdated, and if to change them, we need to change them for the modern, sophisticated models. We also have plans which should be adjusted given the budget realities. It's a natural process. It's normal. There is nothing strange about this. We're not going to cut anything. We just maybe move some things to the right, as experts say. But we are going to do this. But Russia is not a project. Russia is our destiny. This is our country. We need to develop it, and we will be doing this for the sake of us, for the sake of future generations. I believe that Russia has a very promising future, a very powerful one, and this country has great prospects. I recalled my first meeting with Chancellor Kohl. I already mentioned this. It was to my great surprise. I was impressed by our talk in Bonn, and suddenly, all of a sudden, I was the former intelligence servant, and he said Europe had no future without Russia, and he provided arguments. He's a historian. In a calm manner, he started to develop this idea, and I was greatly impressed. I was surprised. I realized that in Europe, there are people who sincerely believe in this. Unfortunately, in practical policy, we do not see it very often, but Colin are always ahead of their generation compared to practical politicians of today. And we are going to develop this understanding as well, and the Europeans are going to develop it. And then we will be able to come to solutions at a quicker pace. Now, the last question, the very last question.
Austria.
Just a moment.
My name is Gerhard Mangot. I'm from Austria. I'm a professor of international relations at the University of Innsbruck. Two brief questions. One on Syria. Let's assume and hope that the permanent 5 members of the Security Council find a consensus on the text of a new resolution. What happens, however, if the Syrian government does not abide by its obligations? Your foreign ministry has said yesterday that in such a case, the Security Council will get seized of the matter again. Can you, as the Russian president, in such a case, think of Russia supporting Article 42 measures? And the second point I want to raise, I really admire the diversity of your country. It's a great country, but of course, with a lot of diversity, you get a lot of contradiction of values, and that requires respect among the people, respect by the minorities for the majorities, but also for the majority, but also a respect for the majority for the minority. And that's why I personally would like you to endorse the idea that the beauty of love, regardless of its expression and its form, spread over all your country without any harassment, without anyone having to fear to get beaten or killed.
Let us start with the last part of your question. We do not have any oppression on the gender basis. Russia does not have any laws punishing sexual minorities for their for their orientation. That is why there is nothing to be concerned about. The law was adopted, which prohibits propaganda among minors. But I would like to reiterate, in your country, in all European countries, and Russia, they have huge problem related to the population, the demographic problem. The birth rate is very low. We are dying out. The Europeans are dying out. Same-sex marriages cannot produce children. Would you like to survive thanks to migrants, but you do not like them as well? The society cannot adapt such a huge amount of working migrants. Your choice is the choice you made to accept same-sex marriages and their right to adopt children. But let us have our own choice, the way we see it for our country. As for the rights, I would like to reiterate, representatives of sexual minorities are not oppressed in their rights. We do not have any laws limiting their rights anywhere, neither at work nor in other areas. No laws. I've mentioned it on many occasions. I communicate with these people. I present them with awards, with some public awards if they deserve them at enterprises or in their areas of activities. That's normal. That's natural in our policy. In some countries, the criminal penal punishment is preserved, for example, for homosexuality. In some states of the US, they still have the criminal punishment, and the federal court is against it. It believes it unconstitutional, but cannot cancel them. But such laws exist. Why everybody likes to focus on Russia? We shouldn't exaggerate. There is nothing too awful. And the first part? And Syria and the Security Council. I believe it is not correct to discuss what are we going to do if the Syrian authorities do not comply with their obligations. They have already joined the CWC, and we have no grounds to believe that they are not going to comply with their arrangements, obligations. If this is not the case, we will consider this issue, but it's premature to discuss it right now. I would like to thank you all for our cooperation, for joint deliberations. I started with this point, and I would like to end with it. It is good to see many people who are interested in Russia and who made studying Russia their profession. We like it, and we believe it's of huge importance. We appreciate both your positive assessments and your criticism of Russia. This would help us to build the to shape our domestic policy, and this would help us to develop relations with your countries, because this provides better understanding about the what guides any given country, including in relation to Russia. It's very important and it's very useful. Thank you very much for these efforts, and thank you for coming to Valdai Club discussions. Thank you.